My opponent makes the argument that same-sex marriage should not be at the forefront of the LGBT movement and proposes that instead the movement should focus on battling the stigma associated with queer identities. My opponent argues that gay marriage marginalizes the transgender community, against my claims that same-sex marriage is inclusive of trans people. But I want to point out that we are not debating gay marriage. We are debating same-sex marriage. The term gay marriage is obviously problematic, but that's irrelevant to our discussion. My opponent also speculates about whether the rights the LGBT movement is working towards will even be granted. I don't think that this kind of speculation is constructive or even relevant. My opponent does bring up a worthwhile point when she says that not all LGBT people may seek marriage. It is important to consider that not everyone in the LGBT community thinks same-sex marriage speaks for their interests. Otherwise, we would not be having this debate. But that same-sex marriage is currently the top priority of the movement means that an overwhelming majority of LGBT people consider it to be the most important issue. Same-sex marriage also, while it seems to not directly affect queer youth, is important to them all the same because it gives them a future to look forward to and images to which they can relate and see themselves reflected in. And just because same-sex marriage is the priority does not mean that the movement can't simultaneously focus on other issues such as non-discrimination acts, hate crime legislation, and reaching out to queer youth. After all, the intensely discriminatory policy of don't ask, don't tell has already been repealed despite the fight for marriage equality remaining at the forefront of the movement. My opponent focuses mostly on erasing the stigma associated with LGBT people as her proposed priority of the movement, but she does not elaborate on the best course of action that the LGBT movement must take to do this. I propose that same-sex marriage is the best route to do this. The stigma against LGBT people is a cultural one, so to dismantle it, the LGBT movement must take a cultural route. Same-sex marriage humanizes LGBT people by focusing on them as important components of loving families and contributors to society. While enacting anti-discrimination laws is important, it won't erase a stigma with deep cultural roots. My opponent also brings up that the LGBT movement shouldn't try to challenge cultural norms because they are too controversial, using the same statistic that I cited. However, I think it's worth repeating that only last year, polls showed that 44% of Americans supported same-sex marriage. Today, that number is 53%, almost 10 percentage points difference. I think it would be just foolish to abandon the fight for marriage equality when public opinion is changing so rapidly to be in favor of same-sex marriage. My opponent says that the backlash from the marriage equality movement will worsen the stigma against LGBT people, but clearly if public opinion is improving so rapidly, this is not the case and is only an unfounded fear. The best course of action is to move ahead with same-sex marriage as a priority of the LGBT movement.